Have you ever stood before the ruins of an ancient temple or gazed at artifacts behind museum glass and felt that strange pull of curiosity, that whisper from the past that seems to ask more questions than it answers? For as long as humans have walked the earth, we've been drawn to mysteries, especially those left behind by civilizations that vanished without a trace. Their stories are like unfinished sentences, and their rituals are the most intriguing fragments of all. These weren't just ceremonies, they were conversations with the divine, attempts to harness the unseen forces of the universe, and expressions of what it meant to be human in a world far removed from our own. Today, we're setting out on a journey to explore 25 of the most mystical rituals ever practiced by lost civilizations. From the sun-scorched deserts of Mesopotamia to the mist-shrouded temples of the Maya, we'll step into the footsteps of priests, kings, and ordinary people who believed in a world alive with magic and meaning. These rituals weren't merely superstition, they were sophisticated, deeply symbolic acts that shaped cultures, guided destinies, and sometimes even held the power of life and death in their execution. What did these people believe they were communicating with? What secrets did they think these practices revealed? And why, despite the passage of centuries, do these traditions still captivate us? This isn't just a list, it's an invitation to wonder, to reconnect with that part of ourselves that still feels the thrill of the unknown. As we unravel these 25 mystical rituals, you might find yourself not only learning about the past, but also reflecting on the mysteries that still surround us today. So settle in, open your mind, and let's embark on a voyage through time where every ritual is a story, every symbol a key, and every forgotten civilization a reminder of how much is still waiting to be discovered. Our journey begins not in a quiet temple or a darkened crypt, but in a roaring stadium under the bright Mesoamerican sun. Picture a vast stone court flanked by towering sloped walls. The air is thick with the smell of copal incense and the deafening cheers of thousands. Two teams face each other, their bodies heavily padded, yet their fate hanging by a thread. This was the Mayan ball game, known as pits, and it was far more than a simple sport. It was a living, breathing reenactment of the myth of the hero twins from the Popol Vuh, the Maya creation story, a deadly drama where the outcome was a matter of life, death, and the very order of the universe. The objective was deceptively simple: to keep a solid rubber ball, astonishingly heavy and capable of delivering serious injury, in play using only hips, thighs, and forearms. But the real stakes were anything but. This game was a ritual battle between the forces of light and dark, a symbolic journey through the Maya underworld of Xibalba. The ball itself represented the sun moving through the heavens, and the court was a liminal space, a portal between the world of the living and the realm of the gods. A win was a triumph of order over chaos, ensuring the sun would rise again and the rains would come. But for the losing team, the price of defeat was the ultimate sacrifice. Contrary to what many believe, it wasn't always the losers who were sacrificed. Some historians suggest it might have been the winning captain or the entire victorious team, as their offering would be the most precious and potent. Their blood was considered the most sacred offering, a life force that fed the gods and maintained the cosmic cycle. The act of decapitation was itself deeply symbolic, often followed by the ritual rolling of the head, a grisly parallel to the ball in play, representing the cycle of death and rebirth. To step onto that sacred court was to volunteer as a player in the gods' divine game, where the ultimate victory was to become the offering that sustained creation itself. This was not a punishment, it was the highest honor, a direct and brutal communion with the divine. From the tumultuous energy of the ball court, we traveled to a place of quiet, sacred precision, the embalmer's workshop in ancient Egypt. Here, the air is heavy with the scent of natron salt and sacred resins, a stark contrast to the roaring crowds. This was the setting for one of the most vital and intricate rituals for ensuring eternal life, the opening of the mouth ceremony. Imagine the profound belief that death was not an end, but a transition, a journey to an afterlife that was a mirror of the living world, but only if the deceased was perfectly prepared. A body without its senses was a soul trapped in a silent, dark prison for all eternity. This ceremony was the key that unlocked that prison door. It was a sophisticated, multi-step ritual performed by priests wearing the mask of Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming. They didn't use their actual hands. Instead, they employed a set of specific, consecrated tools. The most important was the Pesesh Kef, a ceremonial adze with a blade shaped like a calf's foot. This wasn't a tool for physical cutting, but a divine instrument for metaphysical awakening. The priest would gently touch the mouth, eyes, ears, and nose of the mummy, or more commonly, a statue that served as a permanent substitute for the fragile body with this instrument. Each touch was accompanied by specific spells recited from the Book of the Dead, powerful incantations designed to reinvigorate each sense one by one. It was a symbolic act of opening, of freeing the soul to experience the pleasures of the afterlife, but the ritual's power extended far beyond mere physical senses. The final, crucial act often involved the Sem priest, who represented the deceased's heir, presenting a ceremonial meal to the newly awakened mummy. This was the ultimate test of the ritual's success. By offering a leg of oxen or other sacred foods, the priest was proving that the deceased could now see the offering, smell its aroma, and most importantly, open their mouth to consume its spiritual essence. This act restored their ability to eat and drink, ensuring they would not suffer eternal hunger or thirst in the field of reeds. The entire ceremony was a breathtakingly complex blend of theater, faith, and magic, a profound attempt to cheat death not by avoiding it, but by meticulously preparing for it, guaranteeing that consciousness and identity would survive the great transition intact. Leaving the arid, ritualized precision of Egypt, our path now leads us into the damp, deep green heart of an ancient Celtic forest. Here, the air is thick with the scent of moss and earth, and the only sounds are the rustle of leaves and the distant murmur of a sacred spring. Under the canopy of massive, gnarled oaks, a group of figures in stark white robes moves with a reverent silence. They are the druids, the philosophers, judges, and spiritual leaders of the Celtic world, and they are preparing for one of their most sacred rites, the harvesting of mistletoe. This was not the casual Christmas decoration we think of today. It was a plant of immense power, a paradox that held the key to life and death, and its collection was a ceremony of breathtaking specificity and sanctity. The entire ritual was governed by a strict set of natural and celestial rules. First and foremost, the mistletoe had to be found growing not on just any tree, but specifically on an oak. The oak was revered as the king of the trees, the embodiment of strength, stability, and a direct connection to the gods of the sky, like Tyronis, the god of thunder. To find mistletoe, a plant that has no roots in the earth, living high in the branches of the mighty oak, was seen as a divine miracle, a sacred gift from the heavens never touching the ground. This combination was incredibly rare, making its discovery an event of tremendous spiritual significance. Timing was everything. The ritual could not be performed on just any day. Our only detailed account comes from the Roman writer Pliny the Elder, who described that the harvest had to occur on the 6th day of the lunar cycle. This was a time when the moon was waxing, its power growing in the sky, but had not yet reached its full potential. The Celts saw the moon as a dominant force in the natural world, governing the tides of life, growth, and magical energy. By aligning the harvest with this specific phase, the Druids believed they were capturing the plant at the peak of its potency, imbuing it with the moon's vital energy for the coming cycle. The tools and actions of the ceremony were laden with symbolic meaning. The Druids did not use iron blades, which were associated with war and mundane labor. Instead, they used a golden sickle. Gold was a metal of the sun, of purity and the divine, and its use prevented the sacred celestial plant from being defiled by base metal. As the sickle flashed in the forest gloom, catching the light, a priest would carefully cut the mistletoe from the oak, but it could not be allowed to fall to the profane earth. Its celestial nature had to be preserved. Other priests stood ready, holding out a pure white cloth to catch the falling sprigs as they were severed, ensuring the plant was received by something as sacred as itself. The belief was that this correctly harvested mistletoe was a universal panacea, a cure-all of incredible power. It was thought to be an antidote to every poison, a guarantee of fertility for animals and people, and a key that could unlock doors to the other world. It was often dissolved in water or made into a drink and administered as a sacred potion. But its power went beyond mere physical healing. It was a symbol of peace. When enemies met under the mistletoe, they were obligated to lay down their arms and observe a truce. This single, carefully gathered plant encapsulated the Druidic worldview, a profound understanding of the interconnectedness of nature, the heavens, and human life, all governed by a sacred order that required precise ritual to access and maintain. From the life-giving, earth-bound power of the Celtic grove, we ascend to a world of breathtaking and terrifying extremes, the snow-capped peaks of the Andes. Here, the air is thin and frigid, the wind a constant howl, and the sun glares with an unforgiving intensity. For the Inca, these mountains were not just geological features. They were appease, powerful living gods that controlled the weather, the water, and the very survival of the empire. To appease these mighty deities and ensure the continued flow of water to the terraced fields below, the Inca performed their most profound and sobering ritual, the captivated. The process began not with a search for a victim, but with the selection of a sacred being. Children from across the vast Inca Empire, often as young as 4 or 5 and rarely older than 15, were chosen for their physical perfection and noble lineage. They were not taken by force, their families offered them, believing it was the highest honor imaginable. A child selected for the captivated was considered uniquely pure, a flawless vessel who would become an immortal ambassador to the gods. They were taken to the capital, Cusco, to be presented to the Sopa Inca himself, the divine emperor and son of the sun. There, they participated in lavish feasts and ceremonies, treated as living representatives of the divine. This journey across the empire was itself a sacred pilgrimage, a procession that physically and symbolically connected the far-flung provinces to the spiritual heart of the empire. The final, solemn ascent to the mountain summit was the culmination of this sacred journey, accompanied by a procession of priests, royal attendants, and bearers carrying exquisite offerings. Miniature gold and silver figurines, fine textiles, and vessels of food and chicha beer. The child would climb to a burial site sometimes over 20,000 feet above sea level. Modern archaeological finds, like the incredibly preserved mummies of the Luleloko maiden and the children of Luleloko, give us a hauntingly intimate window into this final ceremony. Forensic evidence suggests the children were often given a sedative brew made from chicha and coca leaves, allowing them to fall into a deep, sleep-like state from the cold and altitude before the end. They were then placed in a carefully prepared tomb, seated in a peaceful, cross-legged position, surrounded by their offerings. This was not an act of cruelty, but one of profound cosmological importance. The Inca saw the world as a system of reciprocal exchange. The mountain gods provided the life-giving water that flowed down to irrigate the crops that fed millions. In return, the Inca had to offer something of equal value. What could be more valuable than the most perfect and precious members of their own society? The child, in a state of ritual purity, became a permanent, deified inhabitant of the peak. They were a living and then eternal offering, a bridge between the human and divine realms whose presence would persuade the Apu to send the rains, prevent devastating droughts or frosts, and bless the empire with fertility and stability. The political message was equally powerful. A sacrifice from a conquered province demonstrated its total integration and subservience to the divine will of the Sapa Inca. The Capacocha was the ultimate act of faith, a belief so strong that it could justify the most profound personal sacrifice for the guaranteed well-being of an entire civilization. Now we journey from the silent, frozen peaks of the Andes to the bustling, sun-baked heart of ancient Mesopotamia, where the air thrums not with thin, cold silence, but with the palpable anxiety and fervent hope of an entire civilization. Here, along the fertile banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, the Babylonians believed their world was perpetually on the brink of descending into primordial chaos. Their most powerful weapon against this existential threat wasn't an army, but a meticulously scripted 12-day drama known as the Akitu Festival. This was not merely a New Year's party, it was an elaborate ritual of cosmic renewal, a divine play where the very king of Babylon was both the lead actor and the potential sacrificial pawn. The festival's profound drama began with an act of stunning humility. Before the eyes of his subjects and the imposing statue of the supreme god Marduk, the king was led into the god's temple. His royal regalia, the crown, the scepter, the jewels of office were forcibly removed. Then, in a moment designed to shatter all pretense of earthly power, the high priest would strike the monarch across the face. This was not an act of disrespect, but a crucial ritual of abasement. The slap served as a sharp, physical reminder that the king's authority was not his own. It was loaned to him by the gods, and it could be revoked in an instant if he had failed in his duties over the past year. The king would then kneel and recite a shocking declaration, proclaiming that he had not sinned, neglected Marduk's city, or otherwise angered the divine assembly. The entire ceremony was a public test of his worthiness to continue ruling, a dramatic reaffirmation of the covenant between the divine and the mortal ruler. With the king's fate hanging in the balance, the ritual's focus then shifted to the gods themselves. The statue of Marduk was ritually cleansed, adorned in magnificent new robes, and placed upon a grand ceremonial barge. It then embarked on a journey outside the city walls to a special temple called the Akitu House, located in the open fields. This was not a peaceful vacation. It was a symbolic reenactment of Marduk's epic battle against Tiamat, the monstrous goddess of the salty sea who represented primeval, undifferentiated chaos. The journey outside the protective city walls represented the god venturing into the dangerous, chaotic realm to once again do battle with the forces of disorder. The people's anxiety during this time was likely immense, for if the god did not triumph, chaos would engulf the world and the new year would not begin. The climax of the festival was the god's victorious return. Marduk's statue was triumphantly paraded back into the city along the grand processional way, greeted by ecstatic crowds. The newly humbled and revalidated king would then take the hand of the divine statue, a powerful gesture symbolizing their renewed partnership and the restoration of divine favor. In a final, glorious ceremony, the king's royal regalia were returned to him, re-crowning him not by human right but by the explicit will of Marduk. This act did not just reaffirm the king's political power, it magically re-established the entire cosmic order Mot, as the Egyptians called it, Me in Mesopotamian terms. The victory over chaos was complete, the social hierarchy was reinforced, and the universe itself was rebooted, guaranteed to function properly for another year. The Akitu was the ultimate state-sponsored ritual, a breathtaking blend of political theater, religious fervor, and deep cosmological belief that bound the fate of a king to the very turning of the heavens. Leaving the grand political theater of Babylon behind, we now sail across the Mediterranean to the vibrant, sophisticated island of Bronze Age Crete. Here, the Minoan civilization thrived in labyrinthine palaces adorned with breathtaking frescoes, a culture that seemed to pulse with a unique energy and reverence for the natural world. And at the very heart of their most iconic imagery lies a ritual so audacious, so physically improbable, that it has captivated and perplexed historians for centuries: the bull leaping ceremony. Forget the passive observation of a ritual. This was a breathtaking, high-stakes performance where human athletes literally danced with the raw, untamed power of a charging bull. The evidence for this practice comes primarily from the stunning artwork that survived the collapse of the Minoan world. Frescoes, seal stones, and gold cups depict a scene of incredible dynamism. A massive, muscular bull is captured in mid-gallop, its head lowered, and in the air above its back, an acrobat is frozen in time, performing a handspring or a somersault. Other figures are shown in the act of grabbing the bull's horns or landing gracefully behind the animal. This was not a savage fight to the death like the later Roman gladiatorial contests. It was a sophisticated, graceful, and profoundly dangerous ballet of trust, timing, and sheer human courage. The participants, both young men and women clad only in loincloths and elaborate belts, were not armed with weapons. Their only tools were their own athletic prowess and an almost supernatural understanding of the animal's movements. But what was the purpose of such a deadly dance? Most scholars believe it was far more than mere entertainment for a royal court. The bull held an immense and central place in Minoan religion and mythology. It was a potent symbol of masculine power, fertility, and the untamable forces of nature itself. The great palace of Knossos was itself filled with bull imagery, and the legend of the Minotaur, the half-man, half-bull creature dwelling at the center of a labyrinth, speaks to the deep psychological hold the bull had on the Minoan imagination. By confronting the bull directly, by literally seizing its horns and using its momentum to vault into a moment of breathtaking flight, these leapers were perhaps engaging in a profound rite of passage. Successfully completing the leap could have symbolized a youth's transition into adulthood, demonstrating the control, bravery, and spiritual favor necessary to become a full member of society. Another compelling theory suggests the ritual was a form of worship, an offering of human skill and courage to appease the powerful bull deities or to ensure a successful harvest. The acrobats, in their display of perfect harmony with this potent symbol of nature, were acting as intermediaries between their people and the divine. They were demonstrating humanity's ability to momentarily transcend its limitations and partner with the chaotic forces of the world, not through domination, but through elegant and respectful cooperation. The immense risk was the entire point. The potential for tragedy is what made a successful leap so spiritually significant. Each vault was a gamble with the divine, a breathtaking performance where the price of a misstep was not just failure, but almost certain goring or trampling. This ritual stands as a powerful testament to a culture that did not hide from the dangers of the world, but chose to meet them with grace, agility, and an audacious spirit. From the graceful, airborne ballet of the Minoans, we are plunged into a night of profound terror and desperate hope in the heart of the Aztec Empire. Imagine the scene as a complete cycle of 52 years draws to a close and absolute suffocating darkness falls over the entire realm. In every city, in every village, in every single home, every fire has been meticulously extinguished. Every cooking hearth, every temple brazier, every torch is cold and dead. The world is silent, cold, and utterly still, holding its breath. This was the Aztec new fire ceremony, known as Toxumulpilya, or the binding of the years. It was a night when the Aztecs genuinely believed the entire universe might simply stop, that the sun would fail to rise, and that the stars would be extinguished forever, bringing about a final, apocalyptic end known as the fifth sun. This overwhelming dread was rooted in the Aztecs' intricate and cyclical view of time. They believed the universe had already been created and destroyed 4 times before, each era, or sun, ending in cataclysm. They lived in the era of the fifth sun, which was destined to be destroyed by a massive earthquake. The 52-year cycle represented the complete convergence of their 2 primary calendars, the Zu Pohuali, the 260-day sacred calendar, and the Tonal Pohuali, the 365-day solar calendar. This convergence was a moment of immense cosmic vulnerability, a point where the machinery of the universe could simply wind down and stop. The central fear was that the sun, the god Huitzilopochtli, was too weak to continue his journey across the sky without a massive infusion of sacred energy of Teotl. Without a ritual intervention of the highest order, the dawn would never come again. All hope rested on the priests of Tenochtitlan. From the vast, darkened city, a solemn procession would make its way to the summit of the Hill of the Star, a mountain called Huixatlan that loomed over the Valley of Mexico. The entire population would climb onto their rooftops, their eyes fixed on that distant peak, their hearts filled with a paralyzing mixture of fear and prayer. At the summit, the priests would wait for a specific celestial sign, the zenith passage of the Pleiades star cluster, known to them as Chanquistli or the Marketplace. When this cluster reached directly overhead at midnight, it signaled that the universe was still in motion and that the ritual could proceed. The climax of the ceremony was both brutal and brilliant. A single, perfectly chosen captive warrior, representing a flawless offering to the gods, was laid upon a stone altar. As the Pleiades shone directly down, the high priest would take a ceremonial fire drill, a stick known as a telemetal, and plunge it into the captive's chest. The act was not just about killing, it was about ignition. The priest would vigorously drill the fire stick into the victim's open breast cavity, aiming to create a spark and produce a new flame from the very heart of the sacrifice. The success of this gruesome act was everything. If a new fire burst to life in the victim's chest cavity, it was the most powerful sign imaginable that the gods had accepted the offering. The sun had been fed, the universe would continue, and the fifth sun was guaranteed for another 52 years. The relief that followed was immediate and explosive. As the new sacred flame blazed on the mountaintop, runners would light torches from it and carry it like falling stars down the hillsides and across the causeways to every corner of the empire. From these torches, every temple fire was relit. People would then bring their extinguished hearths to these central points to collect the new, sacred flame, carrying it back to their homes to reignite their own lives. The ceremony did not end with the fire, it culminated in a massive renewal. Old household idols, pots, and tools were thrown away and replaced with new ones. Homes were cleaned and swept out. It was a literal and spiritual rebirth for every single person, from the emperor to the farmer, all made possible by that single, terrifying spark of life created from a moment of ultimate sacrifice. The new fire ceremony was the ultimate expression of the Aztec worldview, a constant, precarious balancing act between order and chaos, maintained only through the most profound and costly exchanges with the divine. The raw, primal energy of the Aztec new fire ceremony gives way to a different kind of sacred gathering, one held not under a starry sky of existential dread, but within the sturdy wooden walls of a Viking longhouse, where the air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, roasting meat, and the boisterous camaraderie of a people honoring their gods. This was the Norse blot, a sacrificial feast that was the cornerstone of their relationship with the divine. Far from being a somber, private affair, the blot was a vibrant, communal event, a crucial ritual of reciprocity that bound the gods, the land, and the people together in a cycle of gift-giving that was essential for survival in their harsh world. The ceremony always began with the selection and consecration of the offering. The chosen animal, typically a prized boar, a sturdy ox, or a sturdy horse, was not selected at random. It was the best of the herd, a valuable and meaningful gift intended for a specific deity. For a victory in battle, a sacrifice might be dedicated to Odin, the All-Father and god of war and wisdom. For protection on a sea voyage or for good weather, the offering would be made to Njörður, the god of the sea and wind. For a bountiful harvest or for fertility, the powerful thunder god Thor, defender of Midgard, might be the intended recipient. Before the sacrifice, the animal was led before the assembled community and ceremonially sanctified. Water was sprinkled on its head, causing it to shake, a movement interpreted as a willing acceptance of its fate and a positive omen from the gods. This act transformed the animal from mere livestock into a sacred vessel, a willing messenger to the divine realm. The act of sacrifice itself was swift and purposeful. The blood was considered the most sacred element, the very seat of life force or earned. It was not wasted but carefully collected in a large bowl known as a lodbally. This vessel was then used in the most visually striking part of the ritual, the sprinkling. Using a bundle of twigs called a lotane, the chieftain or gothi priest would flick the warm blood onto the altar, the wooden statues of the gods that stood within the vey or sacred enclosure, and onto the walls of the temple to hallow them. But most importantly, he would sprinkle it onto the participants themselves. This wasn't an act of defilement, but one of blessing and unification. By being anointed with the sacred blood, the people were symbolically sharing in the offering, connecting their own life force with that of the gods and affirming their place within the cosmic order. With the most solemn part of the ritual complete, the atmosphere would shift dramatically to celebration. The consecrated animal was then butchered and cooked in a great cauldron, and a magnificent feast began. This communal meal was the essential second half of the blot, the moment where the gift was physically shared among the community and by extension with the gods. The first portions of the meat, along with a horn of ale or mead, were raised in toast to the gods. Toasts or full were made first to Odin for victory and power, then to Njörður and Freyja for peace and a good harvest, and finally to the memory of departed kinsmen. Drinking these ceremonial toasts was obligatory. To refuse was to insult the gods and the community. The feast that followed was a powerful social glue, reinforcing bonds of loyalty between chieftains and their followers, between families, and between the people and the divine. They believed that the gods themselves were present at the feast, partaking in the offering and the camaraderie, enjoying the essence of the food and drink. The underlying principle of the blot was the ancient Germanic concept of do ut des, I give so that you may give. The Vikings lived in a world of precarious balance, utterly dependent on forces beyond their control, the success of a raid, the fertility of the land, the harshness of the winter. By offering their most valuable possessions to the gods, they were engaging in a reciprocal relationship. They gave a gift of life, the blood and meat of the sacrifice, with the expectation of receiving a gift in return: victory in battle, fair winds for their ships, or a season of abundance. The blot was not an act of groveling worship, but a pragmatic and deeply social contract with the divine. A feast where the gods were honored, guests and the entire community reaffirmed its bonds and secured its future through shared sacrifice and celebration. Shifting from the boisterous, blood-anointed feasts of the Norse world, we find ourselves in a place of profound stillness and geometric perfection. In the heart of the ancient Indus Valley city of Mohenjo-Daro, the air is dry and hot, the streets are laid out in a flawless grid, and a deep, unsettling silence hangs over one of archaeology's most enduring puzzles, the Great Bath. This structure is not a temple or a palace in the traditional sense, but a breathtaking feat of hydraulic engineering that speaks to a civilization obsessed with order, cleanliness, and a ritual relationship with water that may form one of the earliest roots of Hindu practice. Imagine a massive, watertight tank meticulously constructed from finely fitted bricks and sealed with a layer of natural tar to prevent any leakage. It measures approximately 12 meters by 7 meters and is sunk 2.4 meters into the ground, with a sophisticated system of stairs leading down into its depths on the north and south sides. But the engineering genius is most apparent in what surrounds it. An intricate network of rooms, some believed to be changing areas or private bathing chambers, encircles the main pool. Most impressively, the entire complex is serviced by the world's first known covered drainage system. A large well in one of the adjacent rooms would have supplied fresh water, while a corbelled drain in one corner could efficiently empty the entire basin for cleaning and maintenance. This was not a public swimming pool, it was a highly controlled, sacred space for a very specific kind of activity. The purpose of this astonishing structure remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the ancient world, as the Indus Valley script is still undeciphered. However, the most compelling theory points directly to its use for ritual purification. The entire design suggests a preoccupation with containing and controlling water, a substance both life-giving and potentially contaminating. The bath's location within the elevated citadel complex, separate from the mundane activities of the lower city, marks it as a space of immense social and religious importance, likely reserved for a priestly elite. The act of descending into that still, contained water would have been a powerful physical and symbolic transformation, a leaving behind of the profane world of dust and decay to enter a state of ritual purity. This theory gains tremendous weight when viewed through the lens of later Indian traditions. The concept of ritual bathing for spiritual cleansing is a cornerstone of Hinduism, evident in the sacred dips millions of pilgrims take today in the Ganges at Varanasi. The Great Bath, with its sophisticated control of water, its secluded and elevated position, and its clear separation from everyday life, appears to be a direct millennia-old precursor to these practices. It suggests the people of the Indus Valley civilization may have already developed a sophisticated concept of purity and pollution, where water was not just for physical cleaning but for spiritual washing, preparing an individual for contact with the divine. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the Great Bath is the silence that surrounds it. Unlike the dramatic myths of the Maya or the detailed texts of Mesopotamia, we have no stories, no names of gods, no priestly instructions from Mohenjo-Daro. We can only infer the meaning from the architecture itself. We can picture a solemn procession of figures descending the stairs into the cool, still water, performing ablutions not for hygiene but for the soul. They left behind no grand statues or gold-filled tombs, but instead this perfect, empty tank, a silent, powerful testament to a civilization that believed order, both civic and spiritual, began with cleanliness, and that the path to the divine was through water, meticulously contained and reverently used. Now we travel to the sun-baked coast of North Africa, to the formidable city-state of Carthage, where we must confront one of the most controversial and disturbing rituals of the ancient world, the purported sacrifice of children to the supreme god Baal-Hamon. For centuries, the only accounts of this practice came from the bitter enemies of Carthage, Greek and Roman historians, who described horrific scenes of infants and children being burned alive as offerings within a sacred precinct called a Tophet. These stories were long dismissed by many modern scholars as classic propaganda, the victor's attempt to paint a vanquished rival as the ultimate barbarian. But then archaeologists began to dig, and the earth itself began to offer up its own silent and deeply unsettling testimony. The primary evidence comes from the Tophets themselves, sacred enclosures found not only in Carthage but in other Punic colonies across the Mediterranean. These were not mass graves hidden away in secret. They were prominent, carefully maintained open-air sanctuaries, often located near burial grounds for adults, signaling their accepted and formal role in society. Within these spaces, archaeologists have unearthed thousands of small, individual burial urns, each containing the cremated bones of a very young child or, in some cases, an animal, often a lamb or a goat. The urns were then buried under stone markers known as stelae, many of which are inscribed with a standard dedication formula: to the Lady Tanit, face of Baal, and to the Lord Baal-Hamon, that which was vowed. This formula, repeated across centuries, points to a highly formalized, institutionalized practice. The sheer scale is staggering. The Tophet in Carthage alone may hold the remains of over 20,000 children, a number that is difficult to explain away as simple infant mortality. This is where the fierce academic debate ignites. On one side, the traditionalist interpretation holds that these finds confirm the ancient historical accounts. They argue the inscriptions, the specific choice of very young children, often between a few months and 2 years old, and the presence of animal substitutes in some urns all point to a practice of mulk, a sacrificial offering to appease the gods in times of extreme crisis, such as war, famine, or plague, or to fulfill an exceptional vow made by a wealthy or noble family. The burning, while horrifying to our sensibilities, may have been seen as the most potent way to release the child's spirit and send it directly to the divine realm, the ultimate gift from a family to ensure the continued favor of the gods upon the entire community. The revisionist school offers a different, more somber reading of the same evidence. They propose that the Tophet was not a site of ritual murder, but a special cemetery for children who died naturally from stillbirths, diseases, or the tragically high infant mortality rates of the ancient world. In this view, the cremation and the votive inscriptions were not about sacrifice, but about a desperate, pious offering made by grieving parents. By dedicating the remains of their deceased child to Baal Hammon and his consort Tanit, they were perhaps seeking divine protection for the child's soul in the afterlife, or attempting to ensure the favor of the gods for any children they might have in the future. The animal remains in some urns could be seen as symbolic substitutes, offered in place of a child who had already passed, a ritual attempt to complete a vow that death had preempted. Perhaps the most likely truth lies in a complex and unsettling middle ground. It is possible that both practices occurred over Carthage's long history. The Tophet may have primarily served as a sacred cemetery for children who died of natural causes, with the rituals and dedications being a form of funerary practice. However, in moments of existential panic, during severe military defeats or droughts that threatened the city's survival, the culture may have turned to the most extreme form of mulk, the actual sacrifice of a living child, seen as the only offering potent enough to sway the angry gods. This would explain the historical accounts from outsiders who likely witnessed these rare, dramatic, and terrifying public spectacles, while the archaeological record reflects the far more common practice of devotional infant burial. Whether the remains in the urns represent victims of sacrifice or symbols of profound grief, the Carthaginian Tophet stands as a chilling monument to a world where the boundary between the human and the divine was negotiated through the most vulnerable members of society. Yet, even as the Carthaginians negotiated with their gods through the most vulnerable of offerings, an entirely different approach to the divine was unfolding across the Mediterranean. In the quiet countryside just outside Athens, the ancient world's most revered and well-kept secret promised not a bargain with the gods, but a personal, transformative union with them. For nearly 2,000 years, from the Bronze Age well into the Roman era, a single ritual offered initiates a glimpse of eternity and a promise that death was not an end, but a blessed beginning. This was the Eleusinian Mysteries, a ceremony of such profound secrecy that even today, its core truths remain hidden, its power echoing only through the whispers of those who experienced it and were forever changed. The journey to Eleusis was a sacred pilgrimage, a 14-mile walk from Athens along the sacred way that was as much an inner journey as a physical one. Before even setting out, prospective initiates had to undergo a rigorous screening process. They had to be Greek-speaking, free of blood guilt, and crucially, sponsored by a previous initiate who could vouch for their character. The first stage of the ritual, the Lesser Mysteries, held each spring at Agrai near Athens, acted as a purification, a preparatory cleansing for the main event. But it was the Greater Mysteries taking place each September that held the true power. The procession to Eleusis was a public spectacle of faith, a river of thousands winding its way to the Telesterion, the massive, windowless hall that was the heart of the mystery. Participants would carry sacred objects in closed chests, shout obscenities in honor of the crone goddess Iamb, and cross a bridge where onlookers would hurl insults, all rituals designed to strip away social status and personal pride, preparing the soul for what was to come. Upon arriving at the sanctuary, the initiates began a period of strict fasting, mirroring the grief of the goddess Demeter when her daughter Persephone was abducted by Hades. This abstinence was broken by the consumption of a special ritual drink called kykeon. This was no ordinary beverage. It was a humble barley potion mixed with water and fresh pennyroyal mint. Its simplicity was deeply symbolic, reflecting the drink Demeter accepted from the mortal woman Metanera in the Homeric hymn, breaking her fast and ending her deep mourning. However, many modern scholars propose that the kykeon's role was far more than symbolic. They suggest it may have been a potent entheogen, a psychoactive brew. Barley is known to be susceptible to ergot, a fungus containing lysergic acid amides, compounds closely related to LSD. When carefully prepared, a brew made from ergotized barley could have induced powerful altered states of consciousness, visions, and a profound sense of awe. This chemically induced transcendence would have been interpreted by the initiates not as a drug trip, but as a genuine divine revelation, a direct experience of the sacred. The climax of the mysteries occurred inside the vast, dark telesterion. Here, in the absolute blackness, the initiates would witness the dromna, the things done, the deiknaimna, the things shown, and finally hear the legomna, the things said. What precisely these were, we cannot know for certain, as the vow of secrecy was absolute and never broken. The penalty for revealing the secrets was death, and the ancient sources, even those who were initiates themselves, only speak of the mysteries in the most reverent and oblique terms. It is believed the rituals involved a dramatic reenactment of the myth of Demeter and Persephone, the abduction, the desperate search, the grief, and the joyful reunion that brought life back to the world. This myth of descent and return was the key to the entire mystery. It taught that just as Persephone descended to the underworld and returned each year, so too could the human soul undergo a similar cycle. Death was not a void, but a transition to a different state of being. The promise made to initiates was explicit and incredibly appealing. While ordinary souls were thought to wander the gloomy asphodel meadows of the underworld as faint, forgetful shades, those who had seen the mysteries were guaranteed a better fate. They would dwell in the sunny, blissful Elysian fields, enjoying a blessed afterlife among the heroes. This was not a promise of resurrection, but of a privileged status beyond death. The experience was so powerful that it fundamentally altered a person's perception of life and death. The great orator Cicero, who was an initiate, wrote that the mysteries taught us not only to live with joy, but to die with a better hope. In a world often filled with uncertainty and fear of the unknown, the Eleusinian mysteries provided something priceless, a direct, personal, and unforgettable assurance that there was light waiting in the darkness and that the soul's journey did not end at the grave. Leaving the dark, promise-filled halls of Eleusis, we now voyage across the vast, open expanse of the Pacific Ocean to the volcanic islands of Polynesia. Here, the relationship between humanity and the natural world was not one of domination, but of kinship and respectful negotiation. The ocean was not a barrier, it was a highway, a provider, and a realm teeming with powerful, intelligent spirits. And among its most respected and feared inhabitants were the sharks, Mono. To command the attention of such a creature was to demonstrate a profound connection to the divine. This was the purpose of the shark callers, priests who performed one of the world's most daring rituals, summoning sharks from the depths to the surface, not to kill them but to commune with them. This ritual was not performed on a whim. It was a highly specialized practice, most famously associated with the islands of New Ireland in Papua New Guinea and parts of French Polynesia, carried out by a designated priest who possessed the hereditary or spiritually granted mana, the sacred power to communicate with the shark spirits. The ceremony began not in the water but on land with meticulous preparation. the priest would enter a period of ritual seclusion, abstaining from certain foods and practices to purify himself and build up his spiritual potency. He would craft his sacred tools, a specially carved ceremonial hat, a pair of coconut shell rattles, and most importantly, a unique lore made from a bundle of specific leaves and vines, often containing a sacred stone. Every element was charged with intention and mana, transforming simple objects into conduits for spiritual power. The moment of truth arrived at dawn when the sea was calm and the light was soft. The priest, often accompanied by an apprentice in a small outrigger canoe, would paddle to a known shark ground. The atmosphere was thick with tension and reverence. Then the calling would begin. He would use his coconut rattles, tapping them rhythmically against the side of the canoe, creating a distinct, percussive sound that was believed to mimic the thrashing of a wounded fish, a dinner bell for any nearby predator. But this was more than mere trickery. As he rattled, the priest would begin to chant. These were not generic calls. They were ancient, powerful incantations passed down through generations, personal invocations addressing specific shark spirits by name, inviting them to come, to receive an offering and to parley. The response was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. From the deep blue, a shadow would emerge, growing larger until the distinct, sleek form of a shark, often a large and potentially dangerous species like a tiger or bull shark, would break the surface, circling the frail canoe. This was the critical juncture. The priest would then offer the shark a ritual gift, typically a paste made from mashed taro or other root vegetables, sometimes mixed with fish. The acceptance of this offering was the sign of a successful and peaceful summoning. It signified that the shark spirit recognized the priest's authority and had come in peace, not in hunger. The ultimate, almost unbelievable demonstration of this sacred bond followed. In some recorded instances, the most powerful callers would slip into the water with the summoned shark. With an immense trust that defies all modern understanding of these animals, the priest would gently grasp the shark's dorsal fin and be taken for a ride, a breathtaking display of spiritual mastery over one of nature's most perfect predators. To the community watching from the shore, this was not a stunt. It was irrefutable proof that their priest could navigate not only the physical world but the spiritual one. He had not tamed the shark in a domestic sense. He had entered into a temporary pact with it, a mutual recognition of power and respect. The purpose of this incredible ritual was deeply practical and spiritual. A successful calling ensured the protection of the village's fishermen and bathers from shark attacks, as the pact with the shark spirits promised safety. It could also be a method of divination. The behavior of the shark, its size, species, and demeanor, was interpreted as an answer to questions about the future, the weather, or the outcome of an upcoming battle. The shark caller was the community's intermediary, the one who could translate between the human world and the powerful, often dangerous forces of the sea. His ritual was a breathtaking gamble of faith, a dance on the razor's edge between reverence and peril, where the ultimate proof of his power was not a spoken promise, but the silent, graceful glide of a shark beside his canoe. From the open ocean and its powerful animal spirits, we journey now to the very heart of urban civilization, to the bustling, mud-brick city of Uruk in ancient Mesopotamia. Here, amidst the towering ziggurats that scraped the sky, an act of profound intimacy was transformed into a public spectacle of cosmic significance. This was the Sumerian sacred marriage rite, known as the Hieros Gomos, a ceremony where the boundary between the human and the divine completely dissolved, and the fate of the entire kingdom was believed to hinge on a single, ritualized night of passion. The entire ritual revolved around the powerful, complex figure of the goddess Inanna, the queen of heaven and earth. Inanna was a deity of dualities. She was the goddess of love, beauty, and sexual desire, but also of war, political power, and contested sovereignty. She was the vital force of life itself, and her favor was the essential ingredient for the prosperity of the land. The central belief was that for the earth to be fertile, for the crops to grow, the herds to multiply, and the people to thrive, the goddess herself had to be annually rejuvenated through sacred union with her consort, the shepherd god Dumuzi. But since gods could not physically walk the earth, this divine coupling required human avatars. This is where the king, or En, entered the picture. The king did not merely rule by force. His legitimacy was entirely dependent on proving he possessed the divine mandate to lead. The sacred marriage rite was the ultimate test and validation of that mandate. For the ceremony, the king would take on the ritual identity of Dumuzi. His partner was the Intu priestess, the highest-ranking religious figure in the land, who would become the living embodiment of the goddess Inanna herself. This was not a simple bit of theater. Through elaborate rituals, chants, and purification ceremonies, these two individuals were believed to actually channel the essences of the deities they represented. For one night, they were the gods. The ceremony itself was a grand public event, a culmination of festivals, processions, and offerings. The climax occurred in the Jiparu, the sacred bedroom of the goddess located within her temple complex. The king and the priestess would enter this inner sanctum, and their physical union was not a private act but a public ritual performed on behalf of every single citizen. Their coupling was believed to magically channel the goddess's life-giving me, the divine decrees that governed all aspects of civilization directly into the world. As the royal couple embodied the union of Dumuzi and Inanna, they were quite literally making the land fertile, ensuring the rivers would swell, the dates would ripen, and the womb of every woman and you would be fruitful. The morning after was just as important as the night itself. The successful completion of the rite was a public celebration. The king would emerge from the temple not just as a ruler, but as a proven god-king, his power now divinely sanctioned and irrevocable. The priestess, returning to her mortal form, would bestow upon him the symbols of his office, solidifying the covenant between the throne and the heavens. The entire population would breathe a sigh of relief. The ritual had been successful, the cosmic order had been reaffirmed, and another year of abundance was guaranteed. This practice reveals a worldview where politics, religion, and agriculture were inseparable. The king's most important duty was not leading armies or writing laws, but performing his sacred role as the linchpin between the human and divine realms, a responsibility literally consummated in a single, fateful night. Deep within the steamy, verdant jungles of the Mexican Gulf Coast, the air itself feels alive, thick with the buzz of insects and the calls of howler monkeys. Here, amidst the sweltering heat, the Olmec civilization, often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, erected colossal stone heads and built sophisticated cities. But their most enduring and enigmatic legacy is not carved in stone. It is a spiritual concept that permeates their art, the terrifying, awe-inspiring fusion of human and jaguar, a being known to scholars as the word jaguar. This was not a myth to be told, but a state of being to be achieved through some of the most intense and transformative rituals the ancient world ever conceived. The evidence for this practice is everywhere in Olmec art, yet it explains nothing outright. We see countless depictions of figures, often clearly elite or priestly, with distinctly feline features, downturned, snarling mouths, flared nostrils, and cleft heads that resemble the cranial structure of a great cat. Some figures are shown in a full state of transformation, their bodies morphing into powerful, muscular jaguars. This was far more than artistic fancy. It was a depiction of a coveted spiritual goal. The jaguar was the ultimate symbol of raw, untamed power in Mesoamerica. It was the undisputed king of the jungle, a master of both the land and the spiritual underworld, which was often accessed through caves and water sources. To become one with the jaguar was to tap into that primal strength, to gain the ability to traverse the boundaries between the human realm and the spirit world, and to commune directly with the ancestors and forces of creation. Achieving this transformation was not a matter of prayer or simple meditation. It was a brutal, physically demanding ordeal designed to shatter the boundaries of ordinary perception. The ritual likely began with intense purification fasting, sexual abstinence, and perhaps sweat baths to cleanse the body and prepare it as a vessel for the divine. The central act involved the use of powerful psychoactive substances to forcibly open the doors of perception. The Olmec had access to a potent natural pharmacy, the toxic yet visionary secretions of the Bufo alvarius toad, the potent seeds of the morning glory flower, and most famously, the flesh of the psilocybin mushroom. Ingestion of these entheogens would have catapulted the priest into a profoundly altered state, a visionary trance where the lines between self and spirit, human and animal, completely dissolved. In this heightened state of consciousness, the roars of the jungle would have sounded like voices, and the flickering torchlight might have danced with the forms of ancestral spirits and animal guides. But the journey did not end with the mind alone. The body had to participate in the transformation through a sacred act of suffering, bloodletting. Using stingray spines, obsidian blades, or sharpened jaguar bones, all artifacts found in Olmec ritual caches, the priest would perform autocannulation, piercing his own tongue, earlobes, or genitals to draw forth his life essence. This blood was the most sacred substance a human could offer, the very currency of communion with the gods. The act of letting blood while in a powerful hallucinogenic state would have created a terrifying and exhilarating feedback loop. The physical pain and shock intertwined with the psychedelic visions, creating an overwhelming sensory experience interpreted as the very moment of metamorphosis. The blood falling onto bark paper or into a ceremonial bowl was an offering to the jaguar spirits, a payment for the power they were about to bestow. As the ritual reached its peak, the priest, surrounded by the rhythmic beating of drums and the chanting of attendants, would have truly believed he was shedding his human form. He would feel his senses sharpen, his strength magnify, and his consciousness merge with the powerful, predatory spirit of the jaguar. He was no longer just a man, he was a Nahul, a shapeshifter, a bridge between worlds. This newly empowered being could then act as a seer, interpreting omens and divining the future, or as a warrior, channeling the jaguar's ferocity to lead his people in battle. Most importantly, he became a living embodiment of the covenant between the Olmec people and the supernatural forces that governed their world. His transformation guaranteed that the sun would continue its journey, that the rains would come, and that the delicate balance of the cosmos would be maintained. The Olmec word jaguar ritual stands as a profound testament to the human desire to transcend our limitations, to reach for a more powerful state of being through a sacred, terrifying, and ultimately transformative dance with the forces of nature and the spirit. Moving from the humid, transformative jungles of the Olmec, our journey now takes us to the windswept coasts and deep forests of ancient Gaul, where the air is sharp with the smell of salt and burning wood. Here, we confront one of the most chilling and controversial images from the ancient world, the specter of a massive, towering Wicca figure, its limbs woven from willow and oak, its cavernous interior filled with living, breathing people and animals, all set ablaze as a single, horrific offering to the gods. This is the Wicca Man sacrifice, an account that has fueled nightmares and scholarly debate for 2,000 years, largely thanks to the vivid and likely sensationalized descriptions of one man, Julius Caesar. Our primary source for this ritual is Caesar's Commentaries on the Gallic War, a work that was as much a piece of political propaganda back in Rome as it was a military journal. In it, he describes the Gauls as being utterly devoted to superstitious rites, and he attributes the practice of the Wicca Man to the Druids. He writes that for large-scale public sacrifices, they would construct colossal figures out of intertwined sticks, filling the hollow limbs and body with a vast number of living beings, criminals, prisoners of war, and innocent animals. He claims that once the structure was full, it was set on fire, and the victims were consumed by the flames as a single, massive burnt offering to the gods, meant to atone for the sins of the entire community or to secure victory in war. The visual is undeniably powerful, a grotesque and terrifying symbol of barbarism that served Caesar's purpose perfectly, to justify his brutal conquest of Gaul by portraying its people as savages in need of Roman civilization and order. The question that has haunted historians and archaeologists ever since is simple. Did this actually happen, or was it a complete fabrication? The evidence is frustratingly one-sided. No archaeological evidence of a giant wicker man has ever been found, which is not entirely surprising given its perishable materials, but its absence is notable. No other contemporary Roman writer provides a corroborating eyewitness account, and no native Celtic sources describing such a practice exist. This has led many modern scholars to heavily discount Caesar's story, arguing it is a classic example of translatio imperii, the transfer of empire trope, where a conquering power demonizes its enemies by attributing to them the very same monstrous practices that were once attributed to the conquerors themselves by even earlier writers. The Greek historian Herodotus, centuries before Caesar, wrote about similar giant human sacrifices performed by the Scythians, and some believe Caesar simply borrowed and relocated this trope to the Gauls to make them seem more fearsome and alien to his Roman audience. However, to dismiss the account entirely might also be an oversimplification. While the giant man-filled effigy may be an exaggeration, it likely contains a kernel of truth rooted in genuine Celtic practices. We know from multiple sources that the Celts did practice human sacrifice. The preserved bog bodies found across northern Europe, such as Lindoman in England, show clear evidence of ritualistic killing methods, blows to the head, garroting, and throat slitting, often in a manner that suggests a triple death offered to three different gods. The Greco-Roman writer Strabo also states that the Celts would shoot their victims with arrows or impale them in sacred groves, practices that align with a world view where life itself was the most valuable currency for negotiating with the divine. It is therefore highly plausible that the Wicker Man story is a grotesque inflation of a real, but far less cinematic, ritual. The Druids were known to use wicker work in various ceremonies. A more likely scenario is that they constructed large, human-shaped wicker frames as symbolic containers for offerings. Instead of living people, these frames might have been filled with offerings of livestock, grain, valuable objects, or perhaps even effigies made of straw. Setting this sacred bundle ablaze would have been a powerful and dramatic act of votive sacrifice, a way to send the offerings directly to the gods in the transformative medium of smoke and fire. The scale and spectacle of such an event could have easily been misrepresented or deliberately inflated by Caesar or his sources into the monstrous legend we know today. The true power of the Wicker Man myth, whether fact or fiction, lies in what it reveals about the observers as much as the observed. For the Romans, it became the ultimate symbol of Celtic barbarism, a justification for conquest. For us, it serves as a stark reminder of the perils of historical interpretation and the power of propaganda. It challenges us to look beyond a single, sensational source and to understand a culture through its broader practices and beliefs. The Celts undoubtedly believed in the power of sacrifice to maintain the cosmic balance, but whether that belief ever took the form of a giant, screaming inferno remains one of history's most haunting and unanswerable questions. Leaving the haunting ambiguity of the Celtic Wicker Man far behind, we find ourselves on the arid north coast of Peru, where the Moche civilization flourished for over 700 years. This was a culture of master artisans whose breathtakingly realistic pottery and elaborate temple murals provide us with a startlingly clear window into their world, a world where art, warfare, and religion were inseparably fused. And perhaps no ritual captures this fusion more dramatically and vividly than the ceremonial combat between elite Moche warriors, a sacred battle that was less about killing an enemy and more about creating a perfect, willing offering for the gods. The stage for this ritual was not a chaotic battlefield, but a highly structured ceremonial precinct, often located at the foot of a massive pyramid like the Huaca de la Luna. The participants were not common soldiers. They were members of the elite, the curocas, adorned in some of the most spectacular regalia of the ancient Americas. Imagine these warriors, resplendent in gleaming gold nose ornaments and intricate ear spools, their bodies protected by thick cotton padding and powerful wooden clubs in their hands. They were often accompanied by a ritual attendant, a figure who would play a crucial role in the ceremony's final, bloody act. The combat itself was a formal, one-on-one duel governed by strict rules of engagement. The goal was not to kill one's opponent outright on the field, but to defeat him, to strip him of his weapons, his helmet, and most importantly, his honor, rendering him a suitable vessel for sacrifice. This was the profound and chilling twist of the Mach ritual. For the defeated warrior, the loss was not a shameful end to be avoided, but a sacred destiny to be embraced. His capture was not followed by imprisonment or slavery, but by a swift and respectful journey to the altar. The elaborate artwork, particularly the famed sacrifice ceremony mural, shows us exactly what happened next. The captive, often depicted with a rope around his neck, is led before a powerful priest-king figure, often identified as the appease or the decapitator god. The victor of the combat, still in his full regalia, presents his defeated opponent. Then, a priest would hold a ceremonial cup to the captive's throat, and with a sharp blade, his blood was swiftly collected. The consumption of this blood was the ritual's ultimate purpose. The Mach believed that blood, or ilapa, was the sacred life force that sustained the gods and, by extension, the entire world. It was the essential offering required to ensure the fertility of the fields, the regular arrival of life-giving water from the mountains, and the continued stability of the cosmos. The principal priest and the elite participants would drink the warm blood from these cups, an act of communion that literally integrated the life force of the noble sacrifice into the leaders of the community, renewing their power and vitality. The body of the sacrificed warrior was then often dismembered, with the limbs distributed among other elites, further symbolizing the spreading of this sacred energy throughout the society. This complex ceremony was far more than a simple blood sport. It was a powerful narrative of reciprocity, renewal, and the cyclical nature of power. The defeated warrior was not a victim in the modern sense. He was a willing participant in a cosmological drama. By offering his life force, he was ensuring the continued prosperity of his people, achieving a form of immortality through his integration into the very rulers he fought against. The victor, meanwhile, demonstrated his martial prowess and divine favor, solidifying his own elite status. The entire ritual, from the formal combat to the shared consumption, reinforced the social hierarchy and provided a dramatic, public reaffirmation of the covenant between the Mach people and their gods, a covenant that had to be paid in the most valuable currency imaginable, the blood of their very best. Leaving behind the dramatic blood rites of the Mach, we now travel to a continent where the very concept of ritual is woven into the land itself. In the vast, sun-scorched expanse of Australia, the Aboriginal understanding of creation is not a singular event locked in the distant past, but an eternal, living process known as the dreamtime. This is not a dream in the sense of sleeping, but a sacred era when ancestral beings, part human, part animal, part spirit, emerged from a formless earth and moved across the landscape, singing the world into existence. Every hill, every river, every waterhole, and every rock formation was shaped by their journeys and their actions, and the most profound rituals performed by Aboriginal peoples for over 60,000 years are not mere reenactments of these stories. They are powerful acts of participation designed to keep the world literally alive and in balance. Central to this practice are the songlines, or dreaming tracks, intricate pathways that crisscross the entire continent, mapping the precise routes taken by the creator ancestors. A songline is a sequence of sacred sites connected by a song, a series of verses that describe the landmarks, the resources, and the events that occurred at each location. To sing the song is to navigate the land, but it is also so much more. The song itself is a living archive of lore, history, and survival knowledge, passed down unchanged through countless generations. A ritual ceremony often involves walking a section of a songline, singing the ancestral verses at each site. This is not a performance for an audience, it is an act of maintenance. By ritually walking and singing the path of the ancestor, the participants are believed to recharge the land's spiritual energy, to remind the creation of its own story, and to ensure the continued fertility of the plants and animals associated with that particular dreaming. It is a solemn responsibility, a ritual that literally holds the fabric of reality together. The preparation for these ceremonies is as significant as the event itself. Elaborate body painting transforms the participants into living embodiments of the ancestral beings. The patterns are not arbitrary, they are sacred designs specific to that person's totem and the dreaming story being celebrated. The paints are made from ochre naturally tinted clays in shades of red, yellow, white, and black mixed with water or animal fat. Applying these paints is a slow, meticulous ritual, often performed by elders, that connects the individual physically and spiritually to the earth. Once adorned, the dancer is no longer merely a person, they become a conduit for the ancestors' presence. The act of dancing, often accompanied by the rhythmic clap of clapsticks and the deep, resonant drone of the didgeridoo, completes this transformation. The dancer's movements are a precise retelling of the ancestors' actions. The hopping gait of the kangaroo man, the slithering motion of the rainbow serpent, the forceful stamping of the lightning brothers. Through this sacred dance, the dream time is made present again, its creative power released once more into the world. The purpose of these complex rituals extends far beyond spiritual affirmation. They are fundamentally practical. The knowledge embedded within the songs and ceremonies is a detailed ecological map. A songline for the honey ant dreaming, for example, will not only tell the story of the ancestor, but will also precisely describe where to find water in a seemingly dry landscape, which plants are edible, and how to locate the honey ants themselves, a vital source of sugar and protein. The ritual of singing and dancing the honey ant story is therefore an act of cultural memory and environmental management. It ensures that this critical survival knowledge is never forgotten, and that the people maintain a respectful, reciprocal relationship with the species that sustains them. The land is not a resource to be exploited, it is a relative to be cared for, and these rituals are the means of that care. To neglect the ceremonies is to risk the land itself falling sick, the waters drying up, and the animals disappearing, because the spiritual connection that maintains the physical world has been broken. In this way, Aboriginal Dreamtime rituals represent the most profound and sustainable expression of a ritual relationship with the environment ever developed, a timeless conversation between people and a living, singing land. When the skies over the Hittite Empire turned to a hard, unforgiving bronze and the rains refused to come, it was not merely a drought, it was a divine crisis. The Hittites, a formidable Bronze Age power in ancient Anatolia, believed their world was a delicate contract between the king, the people, and a vast assembly of gods. At the head of this pantheon stood Teshub, the mighty storm god, who wielded the thunderbolt as his scepter and the rain clouds as his bounty. His displeasure was catastrophic, manifesting as failed harvests, dried-up springs, and military defeats. To address this, the Hittites developed one of history's most meticulously documented purification rituals, a formal, state-sponsored procedure to diagnose the source of divine anger and appease the furious storm god through a grand, orchestrated ceremony of atonement. The ritual began not with action but with intense introspection. Before a single offering could be made, the king and his priests had to determine the precise nature of the offense that had angered Teshub. This was a structured process of divination, often involving haruspicy, the reading of animal livers. A sheep would be sacrificed and its liver carefully examined by a specialist priest. The organ's shape, markings, and anomalies were interpreted as a divine message, a coded map to the specific sin. Had the king neglected a festival, had a temple ritual been performed incorrectly, had a subject broken a sacred oath or violated a taboo, the Hittites kept extensive archives of these divinatory reports and the corresponding rituals, creating a vast manual for troubleshooting divine wrath. Only once the specific transgression was identified could the precise, prescribed purification ceremony begin. The appeasement itself was a multi-sensory spectacle of submission and gift-giving. The centerpiece was often the sacrifice of a chosen animal, but this was far from a simple slaughter. A prized bull, a creature of strength and value symbolic of the god himself, would be meticulously prepared. It would be washed, adorned with ribbons and precious ornaments, and presented before the statue of Teshub. The ritual speeches, preserved on clay tablets, reveal a fascinating psychological approach. The priests would speak directly to the god, not with demands but with reasoned persuasion and flattery. They would acknowledge the people's sin, then present the magnificent bull as a substitute offering, a payment to settle the debt. O storm god of Hatti, a typical prayer might entreat, see this bull, it is fat, it is beautiful. Let the anger in your heart be soothed, be reconciled with the king and the land of Hatti. But the ritual extended beyond the temple walls in a powerful act of sympathetic magic. The concept of purification often involved the literal removal of the sin or defilement from the community. In one remarkable ritual, a selected animal, a goat, a dog, or even a human prisoner of war, was designated as a scapegoat. This living vessel was adorned with the finest textiles and precious metals, symbolically loaded with the sins and impurities of the kingdom. It was then paraded through the city before being formally banished, driven across the border into enemy territory. This act physically transferred the contamination away from the Hittite lands, carrying the stain of the offense far from the site of Teshub, leaving the kingdom ritually clean and pure once more. The ceremony culminated in a grand procession and a communal feast designed to publicly restore the broken relationship. The statue of Teshub would be placed on a ceremonial wagon and paraded through the streets, allowing the people to see their god and demonstrate their renewed devotion. Libations of beer, wine, and fine oils would be poured out as offerings, their scents rising to the heavens as a pleasing aroma for the deity. Finally, the sacrificed bull would be cooked, and a portion of the meat would be presented to the god's statue. The rest would be shared among the priests and the people in a sacred meal. This feast was the final, crucial act of reciprocity. By partaking in the meal, the community was symbolically sharing a restored covenant with Teshub. They had identified their error, offered a valuable gift, removed the contamination, and now shared a meal with their god. They had done everything in their power to correct the balance. All that was left was to wait and to hope that the sound of ritual drums would soon be answered by the far more welcome sound of thunder rolling over the Anatolian plains. Far from the structured divinations of the Hittite Empire, our journey now takes us to one of the most isolated places on Earth, a windswept volcanic island where survival itself was a daily ritual. On Rapa Nui, known to the world as Easter Island, the familiar cycle of monolithic statue construction had been shattered by ecological collapse and societal turmoil. The old ways, centered on the deified ancestors represented by the moai, had faltered. In their place, a new and breathtakingly dangerous ritual emerged to determine spiritual and temporal authority, the Tangata Manu, or Birdman competition. This was not a ceremony of priests and temples, but a visceral test of strength, courage, and divine favor that would decide the island's leader for the coming year. The entire ritual revolved around the migratory sooty tern, a seabird whose arrival each spring was a vital event. The birds nested on the tiny, treacherous offshore islets of Motu Nui, Motu Iti, and Motu Kaukaua, jagged rocks lashed by some of the most dangerous currents in the Pacific. The core belief was simple yet powerful. The first man to secure an unbroken sooty-tern egg from these islets and return it safely to the main village of Orongo was not just a winner, he was the chosen vehicle for the god Makemek's mana. His patron, typically a high-ranking chief or a wealthy landowner known as a hapu monu, would then be instated as the island's sacred leader, the Tangata monu or birdman, for the next year. This transfer of power was a radical departure from the hereditary chiefdom of the past, creating a meritocracy where divine will was proven through athletic prowess and sheer bravery. The competition's intensity began long before the first swimmer entered the water. The contenders and their patrons would gather at Orongo, a ceremonial village perched on the razor edge of the Rono Kau volcano's crater rim. For weeks or even months, they would reside in the village's low, stone-lined houses, engaging in rituals, fasting, and praying to the creator god Makemek, whose face is carved into the rock all across the site. The atmosphere was thick with tension, anticipation, and spiritual preparation. The competitors studied the waves, the bird activity, and the weather, knowing that a single misjudgment could mean death. When the lookouts stationed at Orongo finally spotted the first terns landing on the motu to lay their eggs, the signal was given, and the competition began in a furious explosion of action. What followed was a trial of almost unimaginable peril. The hapu monu, the individual athletes competing on behalf of their patrons, had to descend nearly 1,000 feet of sheer cliff face, using only handholds and toeholds carved into the rock. Reaching the water was only the beginning. They then had to swim over 2 miles of open ocean, through shark-infested waters and powerful, unpredictable currents to reach the islets. Many hapu monu drowned or were dashed against the rocks during this journey. Those who made it to Motu Nui then faced a new challenge, a tense and precarious wait, sometimes for days or even weeks, hiding in sea caves and scouring the cliffs for the first precious egg to be laid. Rivalry was fierce. Sabotage, theft, and even violence between competitors on the islet were not uncommon, adding a layer of human danger to the natural threats. The return journey was the final, most critical test. The hapu monu who found the first egg would carefully tie it to his head using a special band, leaving his hands free for the swim back. He then had to plunge back into the treacherous sea and navigate the currents to the main island, climb the dizzying cliff face with the fragile egg still securely fastened to his head, and finally present it unbroken to his waiting patron at Orongo. The moment the egg was presented, the patron was instantly transformed. He was anointed as the new birdman, a living embodiment of the god Makemek. His head and eyebrows were shaved, and he was painted with sacred red and white pigment. He then took up residence in a special ceremonial house for an entire year of ritual seclusion, during which he was considered tapu, sacred and untouchable. This year of sacred kingship was not a life of idle luxury. The Tangata monu's primary role was that of an intermediary. His actions and his very body were believed to directly influence the island's fortune. He was responsible for ensuring the fertility of the land, the abundance of the crops, and the success of the fishing. His seclusion was a way of containing and focusing his immense spiritual power for the benefit of the entire community. The ritual elegantly solved a major political problem for a society in crisis. By making leadership contingent on a demonstrable act of divine favor, it prevented bloody wars of succession and channeled the competitive energies of the most powerful families into a single, spectacular ceremony. The birdman competition was a testament to the Rapa Nui people's incredible resilience and adaptability, a dramatic reinvention of their relationship with the divine in the face of a changing world, where the ultimate proof of a leader's right to rule was not a carved stone face, but a single, fragile egg carried through stormy seas. Now we descend from the bright, public spectacle of the birdman competition into the absolute darkness of a subterranean temple. Imagine a small, windowless chamber buried deep beneath the streets of Rome, London, or Antioch. The air is cold and thick with the smell of damp earth and smoking torchlight. The only sound is the low, rhythmic chanting of hooded figures. This is a Mithraeum, the sacred gathering place for one of the Roman Empire's most powerful and enigmatic secret societies, the cult of Mithras. Unlike the public rituals of state religion, the Mithraic mysteries were an exclusive, all-male fraternity, offering a deeply personal path to salvation through a terrifying and transformative series of initiation rites that promised to unlock the secrets of the cosmos and guarantee a soul's ascent through the celestial spheres after death. The entire spiritual journey of a Mithraic initiate was structured around 7 grades of ascending difficulty, each ONE Chinese letter to a planet and protected by a specific planetary deity. A newcomer would enter as a Corax, the Raven, under the protection of Mercury. He would then strive to advance through the ranks: Nymphus Bride, Venus, Miles Soldier, Mars, Leo Lion, Jupiter, Perseus Persian, Moon, Heliodromus Sun Runner, Sun, and finally Pater Father, Saturn. Each promotion was not a simple formality. It was a harrowing ordeal designed to test the initiate's courage, loyalty, and understanding of the cult's secret doctrines. The rituals for each grade involved symbolic challenges, the learning of sacred handshakes and passwords, and likely the consumption of ritual meals and wines. The goal was a progressive purification and strengthening of the soul, preparing it for its ultimate celestial journey. The centerpiece of every Mithraeum, and indeed the central icon of the entire faith, was the tauroctony, a detailed sculpture depicting the god Mithras in the act of slaying a great bull. This was not a scene of simple brutality. Every element was a complex astrological cipher. The bull was associated with Taurus, the scorpion that often attacks its genitals with Scorpio, the dog and snake with Canis Minor and Hydra, and the raven with Corvus. Mithras himself, often depicted in a Phrygian cap, was associated with the constellation Perseus. The act of slaying the bull was interpreted as a cosmic event, causing the universe to be created or renewed. The initiates believed that by comprehending this astrological code, they gained knowledge of the divine mechanics of the universe and their own place within it. The most profound initiation rituals were likely those that involved a symbolic death and rebirth. Literary sources and archaeological clues suggest that some rites involved a form of baptism or purification by fire. Others may have involved terrifying ordeals where the initiate was blindfolded, bound, and subjected to loud noises and simulated threats, perhaps even a symbolic burial. After this ritualized death to his old self, the initiate would be reborn into a new life dedicated to Mithras. This psychological trial was meant to strip away his former identity and fears, allowing him to be remade as a new man, an immortal soul temporarily housed in a mortal body, now armed with the secret knowledge needed to navigate the afterlife. Following his symbolic rebirth, the new initiate would participate in a sacred communal meal, a ritual that powerfully echoed the cult's core mythology. According to Mithraic belief, after slaying the primeval bull, Mithras and the sun god Sol Invictus shared a solemn feast upon its hide. In the Mithraeum, initiates would reenact this divine meal. They would recline on stone benches that lined the sides of the temple, and they would share a ritual meal of bread and wine, which was consecrated as the body and blood of the sacred bull. This was not merely a memorial, it was an act of communion. By partaking in the meal, the initiates believed they were absorbing the life force and divine strength of the bull, just as Mithras had, fortifying their own souls for the challenges of the material world and the journey to come. The ultimate promise of these intense and secretive mysteries was a specific and guaranteed path through the afterlife. Mithraism taught a complex cosmology where the soul descended from the realm of the fixed stars at birth, acquiring the influences both good and ill of the 7 planetary spheres it passed through. The great challenge of life was to overcome these negative planetary influences. Through the initiations and the sacred knowledge imparted, an initiate learned how to navigate this celestial geography in reverse. After death, his purified soul would ascend back through the 7 planetary gates, shedding the layers of his mortal impurity at each level until it finally broke free into the eternal realm of light beyond Saturn, achieving a blessed immortality among the stars. This precise, astrologically mapped salvation, earned through personal ordeal and secret knowledge, offered a compelling alternative to the vague underworlds of traditional Roman religion, explaining the cult's powerful hold on the hearts and minds of soldiers, merchants, and bureaucrats across the vast expanse of the Roman Empire. Imagine the scene deep within a Maya royal palace as the first light of dawn begins to pierce the jungle canopy. The air is heavy with the scent of copal incense and the expectant silence of a gathered court. At the center of this solemn gathering stands the king or queen, not as a distant ruler, but as the primary conduit for the entire cosmos. Their body is not their own. It is a sacred landscape, an instrument of sacrifice, and the very key to unlocking the doors of the spirit world. The occasion is a bloodletting ceremony, the most personal and profound act a Maya sovereign could perform, an act of extreme piety designed to tear open the veil between the earthly and the divine. The preparation for this ritual was as meticulous as it was intense. The royal participant would first undergo a period of fasting and purification, often within a sweat bath to cleanse both body and spirit. They would then be adorned in the most elaborate regalia, headdresses of quetzal feathers, jade pectorals, and ornaments that transformed them into a living representation of the world tree, the axis mundi that connected the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. The instruments of the ritual were themselves sacred objects. They did not use common blades, but implements crafted for this sole purpose, stingray spines whose jagged edges were perfect for drawing copious amounts of blood, or obsidian lancets whose volcanic glass could be knapped to an edge sharper than any modern surgical steel. These tools were often stored in special ceremonial caches and decorated with carvings of serpents or deities, marking them as objects of immense spiritual power. The act itself was one of controlled, self-inflicted violence. For a king, the most common method was to draw a thorn-studded rope or a stingray spine through his penis in an act of perforation. For a queen, the ritual often involved drawing a rope embedded with obsidian shards through her tongue. The pain would have been excruciating, a searing, white-hot agony that was not an unfortunate side effect, but the very engine of the ritual. The Maya believed this suffering, this willing offering of one's own life force, was the most potent form of energy that could be offered to the gods. The blood, or kayak, was not merely a biological fluid. It was the sacred essence of life, the same substance that the gods had used to create humanity according to the Papulva. By spilling it, the ruler was returning this divine loan with immense interest, repaying the cosmic debt and nourishing the deities who maintained the universe. As the royal blood soaked into strips of bark paper held in a ceremonial bowl, the ritual reached its critical, mystical phase. The blood-soaked paper would then be burned in a censer, sending clouds of dark, blood-infused smoke billowing towards the temple rafters. It was within this thick, dark smoke that the miracle was believed to occur. The ancestors and gods, nourished and pleased by the sacrifice, would respond. From the swirling clouds, a massive, undulating form would begin to materialize, the vision serpent. This was no ordinary animal. It was a monstrous, bi-headed serpent, often depicted with one head emerging from its own gaping jaws. Its body was not scaly but ethereal, woven from the very smoke and the spiritual energy released by the blood offering. The appearance of the vision serpent was the ultimate validation of the ritual's success and the ruler's divine right to rule. But it was more than just a sign. It was a conduit, a living portal. From the giant, gaping maw of the serpent, an ancestor or a deity would emerge, speaking directly to the ruler and the assembled court. A carved limestone lintel from the ancient city of Yaxchilan provides a stunningly clear window into this moment. It shows Lady Keabel-Zuk, a powerful queen, kneeling in a trance-like state. A monstrous, bi-headed vision serpent coils above her, and from its jaws emerges the helmeted figure of Yat Balam, the dynastic founder of Yaxchilan, fully armed and ready for battle. He is not a ghostly apparition, but a solid, powerful presence, delivering a message or conferring his authority directly upon his descendant. This direct communion served multiple vital purposes. It was the ultimate source of political legitimacy, proving to the people that their ruler could personally converse with the founders of their dynasty and the gods themselves. It was a method of divination, allowing the sovereign to seek guidance on matters of war, agriculture, or succession. And on the deepest level, it was a reaffirmation of the entire cosmic order. The ruler's blood had fed the gods, and in return, the gods had opened a doorway, proving that the covenant between heaven and earth was still intact. The excruciating pain was the price for this certainty, a temporary earthly suffering exchanged for an eternal, verifiable truth. In the darkened temple, surrounded by smoke and the awe of their people, the Maya ruler did not just believe in the other world. They reached out, drew blood, and forced it to appear before them, solid, undeniable, and speaking their name. Leaving the dark, smoke-filled chambers of the Maya far behind, we now ascend into the clear, bright air of the Cretan Mountains. Imagine climbing a rugged, winding path, leaving the bustling Minoan palace complexes and coastal towns far below. The only sounds are the wind whistling through the rocks and the distant cry of a bird of prey. Your destination is not a man-made temple, but a natural altar, a windswept peak that seems to touch the very dome of the sky. This is a Minoan peak sanctuary, a place where the boundary between the human world and the divine felt tantalizingly thin, and where ordinary people engaged in one of the most personal and poignant spiritual practices of the ancient world. Unlike the formal, state-sponsored ceremonies within the great palaces, peak sanctuary worship was remarkably accessible and deeply personal. While priests and elites certainly participated, the archaeological record suggests these sites were open to a much broader cross-section of Minoan society. Farmers, artisans, sailors, and shepherds would make the arduous pilgrimage up the mountainside, driven by a very human need to ask for help. They came seeking healing for an illness, success in a risky sea voyage, fertility for their families or their flocks, or protection from unseen dangers. The journey itself was part of the ritual, a physical struggle that demonstrated the supplicants' devotion and purified them for the encounter with the divine that awaited at the summit. Upon reaching the sanctuary, the worshipper's most important act was to leave behind a votive offering, but these were not offerings of gold or precious jewels. Instead, they were small, humble objects, almost always made of baked clay. The most common offerings by far were models of human body parts, a detailed clay leg, an arm, a pair of eyes, or a woman's breast. These were not generic symbols, they were specific pleas. A person suffering from a crippling leg injury would leave a model of a leg, asking the deity to heal their own. Someone with failing eyesight would offer a pair of clay eyes, hoping for restored vision. A woman struggling to nurse her child might leave a model of a breast, praying for abundance. This practice represents one of the most direct and empathetic forms of prayer we find in the ancient world, a tangible expression of human vulnerability and hope. But the needs of the people extended beyond their own bodies. They also brought miniature models of the things they cared for most in their daily lives. Archaeologists have found countless tiny clay oxen, sheep, and goats, clearly offerings for the health and fertility of their livestock, the very foundation of their wealth and survival. There are models of ships left by sailors or merchants praying for safe passage across the treacherous Mediterranean. Perhaps most intriguing are the small, schematic human figures, often with their hands raised in a gesture of adoration or prayer. Some of these figures are detailed and graceful, while others are incredibly rudimentary, little more than lumps of clay with pinched features, suggesting they were made by the supplicants themselves right there on the mountain, in a moment of raw, urgent devotion. The power of these sanctuaries lay in their location. The Minoans saw mountains as the dwellings of powerful deities, places where the sky god, often associated with the quintessentially Minoan symbol of the double axe or labris, would manifest his presence. To stand on a peak was to be closer to this powerful being than anywhere else on earth. The howling wind was his voice, the flash of lightning was his weapon. The sudden break in the clouds that revealed the shimmering sea far below was a glimpse into his domain. By leaving their humble offerings exposed on these rocky altars, the people were placing their most private fears and desires directly into the hands of the god, trusting that the wind and the rain and the sun would carry their prayers to where they needed to go. The sanctuaries were never roofed or fully enclosed. They were open to the elements because the deity was in the elements themselves. Over centuries, these sites became vast repositories of human hope. Layers upon layers of votives accumulated, creating a powerful, sacred midden. Periodically, the old offerings would be respectfully cleared to make space for new ones, often being buried in pits within the sanctuary grounds. This act of clearing was not disposal. It was a form of sacred recycling, returning the charged clay to the earth from which it came, completing the cycle of the ritual. The enduring nature of these sites, used for over 1,000 years, speaks to the profound comfort and efficacy the Minoans found in this practice. It was a ritual that required no grand priestly intermediary, no knowledge of elaborate mythology. It simply required a heartfelt need, a handful of clay, and the strength to climb a mountain to personally deliver a message to the gods. Now we move from the personal votives of Minoan peak sanctuaries to a spiritual practice that might seem, to our modern sensibilities, its terrifying opposite. We journey to the misty forests and hill forts of the ancient Celts, a people for whom the most potent spiritual object was not a crafted idol, but a human head freshly severed and teeming with power. This was the Celtic head cult, a widespread and deeply ingrained belief system that saw the human head not as a mere body part, but as the very seat of the soul, the vessel of a person's essence, strength, and wisdom. For the Celts, to possess an enemy's head was to capture and control their very spirit. The foundation of this belief was the Celtic concept of the soul. They did not see it as an abstract, formless energy. It was a tangible force centered in the head. The head was the source of a person's life force, their courage in battle, their poetic inspiration, and their knowledge. It was the core of their identity. This belief is vividly illustrated in their mythology. In the Welsh epic, the Mabinogion, the giant Bran the Blessed, after being mortally wounded in battle, instructs his companions to cut off his head. The severed head continues to speak, lead, and feast with them for 87 years, remaining as wise and lively as it was when attached to his body. This was not seen as a grotesque fantasy, but a literal expression of a deeply held truth. The head retained its power and consciousness long after separation from the body. This spiritual conviction manifested in the widespread practice of ritual headhunting. For a Celtic warrior, success in battle was measured not only in territory gained or enemies routed, but in the number and quality of heads he could collect. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus recorded this practice, describing how Celtic warriors would decapitate their most worthy opponents after a fight. They did not hide these trophies, they proudly displayed them. A warrior would hang the heads from his horse's bridle as a grisly badge of honor on his ride home. Upon returning to his village or hill fort, the real ritual began. The heads would be meticulously prepared, the brains removed, the skulls often cleaned and polished, and sometimes even embalmed in cedar oil to preserve them for a long time. The display of these heads was a central part of the cult. They were not stored away but put in prominent positions for all to see. archaeologists have found evidence of skull niches carved into the stone gateposts of hill forts like those at Entremont in France. Here, numerous skulls were found still lodged in rectangular niches, staring out over the entrance as eternal guardians. The Roman writer Strabo mentions heads being nailed to porches or displayed on poles around sacred enclosures. To us, this seems like a stark warning, and it certainly was a powerful deterrent to any would-be attacker. But for the Celts, it was far more than simple intimidation. By displaying the head of a powerful enemy, they believed they were harnessing that warrior's strength and courage, absorbing it into their own community's spiritual defenses. A gatepost adorned with the heads of valiant foes became impregnable, protected by the very spirits of the warriors who had tried to assault it. This practice extended beyond the battlefield and into the domestic and religious spheres. There is compelling evidence that skulls, particularly those of revered ancestors, were kept within homes as protective talismans and objects of veneration. At the Iron Age site of Glauberg in Germany, a magnificent stone statue of a Celtic chieftain was discovered. The statue's head is disproportionately large, emphasizing its importance, and it wears a unique leaf-shaped crown. Astonishingly, a grave found nearby contained a male skeleton with a severe head wound. An analysis showed he was the same individual depicted in the statue. This suggests he was a revered leader, and his skull may have been the focus of a local ancestor cult after his death. In domestic settings, a revered ancestor's skull, placed in a niche or on a shelf, was believed to watch over the family, offering protection, wisdom, and a tangible link to the past. The head was a conduit to the other world, a means of communing with and benefiting from the power of the dead. The ultimate expression of the head cult's sacred nature is found in the archaeological record of temples and ritual deposits. The most famous example comes from the source of the River Seine in France, a place the Celts knew as the sanctuary of the goddess Sequana. Here, pilgrims would come seeking healing from the sacred waters. Among the countless wooden votive offerings of carved body parts thrown into the spring, a practice echoing the Minoans archaeologists made a chilling discovery: several human skulls. These were not battle trophies. They showed no signs of violence. They were carefully placed, likely as the ultimate offering to the goddess. It is believed these were the skulls of revered individuals, perhaps priests or clan elders, offered to Sequana to act as eternal guardians of the sacred spring and powerful intermediaries between the pilgrims and the divine. This act transformed the head from a captured trophy into a sacred relic, a willing gift to the gods that cemented the Celtic belief that the human head was the most powerful spiritual object in the known world. Now we leave the visceral world of Celtic head cults and travel back in time to the precise, geometric order of the Indus Valley civilization. In the meticulously planned cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Kalibangan, amidst the world's first covered drainage systems and standardized brickwork, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of a ritual practice that feels both ancient and eerily familiar: the veneration of a sacred fire. Unlike the dramatic sacrifices of other cultures, this was a ceremony of meticulous control and profound cosmic symbolism, performed on specially constructed altars that may represent the very genesis of a spiritual tradition that continues to this day. The evidence comes not from dramatic art or written texts. The Indus Valley script remains stubbornly undeciphered, but from the architecture itself. At the site of Kalibangan, excavators discovered a series of fire altars in a dedicated ceremonial complex. These were not simple hearths. They were carefully constructed, rectangular clay platforms, often lined with kiln-fired bricks to contain the heat. Most remarkably, many featured a distinctive design: a shallow pit at the center, often containing remnants of ash and charcoal, surrounded by a raised rim. This was a designated, purpose-built space for a controlled, ritual fire, separate from the domestic fires used for cooking and warmth. The altars were often found in groups, arranged in parallel rows within a courtyard, suggesting these were not private devotions but communal ceremonies, perhaps overseen by a specialized priestly class. The true sophistication of these rituals, however, lies in their potential symbolic meaning. Some altars contained not only ash but also calcified bones of animals like goats and cattle, as well as terracotta cakes. This suggests the fire was used for specific offerings, a practice known as a homa or yajna in the later Vedic tradition that swept into the Indian subcontinent centuries after the Indus Valley's decline. The parallel is so striking that many historians see these altars as a direct precursor, a foundational layer upon which Vedic fire worship was built. The central idea that a pure, consecrated fire could act as a conduit, carrying offerings and prayers directly to the divine, may have its roots not with nomadic Aryan tribes, but in the urban, sophisticated spirituality of the Indus Valley people. The design of the altars themselves hints at a deep cosmological understanding. The square or rectangular shape is profoundly significant. In later Hindu philosophy, the square represents the earth, stability, and order, a concept mirrored in the perfectly grid-planned streets of the Indus cities themselves. The circular fire pit at the center could symbolize the sun, the axis mundi, or the point of connection between the earthly and celestial realms. By kindling a fire within this geometric sacred space, the priests were not just making an offering, they were performing a microcosmic reenactment of the universe, creating a point of perfect order where divine communication was possible. The fire's transformation of solid offerings into smoke and ash was a powerful metaphor for the cycle of life, death, and spiritual release, a concept that would become central to Indian religious thought for millennia to come. This connection to later traditions raises a tantalizing possibility that the spiritual worldview of the Indus Valley civilization was not completely erased but was instead absorbed, adapted, and transformed by incoming cultures. The Vedic fire altar, or Vedi, while more elaborate, shares the same fundamental principle of a geometrically precise, earth-bound platform for a sacred flame. The practice of making offerings of clarified butter, grains, and herbs into the fire to the chanting of specific mantras could be a direct evolution of those earlier ceremonies performed at Kalibangan. It suggests a remarkable cultural continuity, a thread of spiritual understanding that connects the anonymous priests of the Indus Valley, who carefully tended their clay altars over 4,000 years ago, to the Hindu priests of today who perform nearly identical rituals, preserving a flame of devotion that has never been extinguished. Now we journey from the contained geometric fire altars of the Indus Valley to a canvas of staggering scale, the vast, arid pampas of southern Peru. Here, the Nazca people transformed the very earth itself into a spiritual landscape, creating geoglyphs so immense they can only be fully comprehended from the heavens. For decades, the purpose of these sprawling lines and figures, the hummingbird, the spider, the astronaut, has been one of archaeology's greatest riddles. But one compelling theory moves beyond the idea of mere art for the gods to view. It suggests these lines were not meant to be seen from above, but to be walked. This was the ultimate ritual procession, a sacred pathway where priests became living conduits, tracing the forms of powerful spirits to channel their energy and directly influence the forces of nature. The act of creation itself was a form of devotion. Using simple tools, the Nazca meticulously cleared the dark, sun-baked surface stones to reveal the lighter, contrasting soil beneath. This process of removing the guyas, or sacred stones, was likely ritualized, with each stone itself carrying significance. But the true power of these designs was unlocked through movement. Imagine a single file line of priests clad in elaborate textiles and feather headdresses, beginning a slow, deliberate walk along the perfectly straight path of a trapezoid or the intricate spiral of a monkey's tail. The path itself was a spiritual conduit. By walking it, the participants were not just honoring the symbol, they were activating it, charging it with their own life force and intention. Each step was a prayer, a physical meditation that connected the walker to the entity the glyph represented. The purpose of these ceremonial walks was likely twofold, blending the celestial with the terrestrial. The first involves astronomy. Many of the long, arrow-straight lines align with significant celestial events, such as the solstice sunset or the rising of certain stars like the Pleiades. For an agricultural society in one of the driest places on Earth, the ability to predict the changing seasons was a matter of survival. A ritual procession along a line that pointed directly to the solstice sunrise on the horizon would have been a powerful act of cosmic synchronization. The priests, by walking the path of the sun on the earth, were magically ensuring its continued journey across the sky and its timely return, guaranteeing the arrival of life-giving water and the growth of crops. The second purpose delves even deeper into the Nazca worldview. The animal and plant geoglyphs are not random. They represent specific spirits and deities central to their cosmology. The hummingbird was a potent symbol of resurrection and fertility, as it was believed to migrate to the world of the ancestors and return. The spider was a creator god associated with rain and water, a desperately precious resource. The killer whale was a powerful, feared deity of the sea, which lay just beyond the desert mountains. By walking the immense form of the spider, a priest was not just asking for rain. He was embodying the spider, merging with its essence and compelling it to act. His footsteps were a direct negotiation, a ritual of sympathetic magic where traversing the vast body of the spirit on the ground would persuade the real spirit in the heavens to bring forth water. This was religion as a participatory act, where the fate of the community literally rested on the footsteps of a few individuals traversing the sacred, dusty paths etched into the floor of the world. From the silent, orderly fire altars of the Indus Valley to the earth-spanning processions of the Nazca, we have journeyed across continents and millennia, witnessing an astonishing tapestry of human belief. We have seen kings humbled before their gods, children become eternal ambassadors, and priests dance with sharks and summon serpents from smoke. This incredible diversity is not a catalogue of strange curiosities. It is a profound testament to the universal human spirit grappling with the same fundamental mysteries. Whether in a Mesopotamian ziggurat or an Andean peak, whether through blood, fire, or ecstatic trance, every one of these 25 rituals was at its core an attempt to answer the same essential questions. Why are we here? What happens when we die, and what invisible forces govern our world? These ancient practices reveal a shared, deep-seated human concern with maintaining balance between order and chaos, the human and the divine, the community and the cosmos. The Aztec feared the sun would not rise without a sacrifice. The Hittite believed a neglected ritual could sour the storm god's mood. The Aboriginal Australian knew that neglecting the songlines could cause the land itself to sicken. This was not superstition, but a sophisticated worldview where humanity held an active, participatory role in the functioning of the universe. Their rituals were the tools for this maintenance, a sacred technology for negotiating with the unpredictable forces of nature, fate, and death. They sought to ensure fertility, avert disaster, and guarantee a place for their souls in the vast, unknown expanse that follows life. Yet within this universal struggle, the methods were as unique as the cultures themselves. The Maya sovereign sought a personal, painful dialogue with deified ancestors, while the Celtic warrior believed he could harness an enemy's spirit by displaying his head. The Minoan commoner left a humble clay offering on a mountain peak, and the Roman initiate underwent a secret, star-based rebirth in an underground temple. This breathtaking variety shows us that there is no single path to the divine, no one correct way to seek meaning. Each civilization, shaped by its environment, its history, and its unique genius, developed a language of ritual that spoke directly to its own hopes and fears. As we bring this exploration to a close, we are left not with answers, but with a deeper appreciation for the questions themselves. These lost civilizations, for all their differences, remind us of our common humanity, our innate desire to connect, to understand, and to find our place within the great cosmic story. Their rituals are an invitation to wonder, a bridge across time that connects their yearning to our own. So we turn this final reflection over to you. Which of these 25 mystical rituals resonated most deeply? Was it the profound promise of Eleusis, the terrifying gamble of the Aztec new fire ceremony, or the elegant, deadly ballet of the Minoan bull leaper? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue this conversation across the ages.